All right, that's a reminder. Hello and welcome everybody to the Tile Network meeting and webinar with Kate Jones. I have the pleasure to welcome her today here, and I'm just going to give a short introduction. I don't think there's much introduction needed. Everyone who's here probably has met her, seen her before, read her books, and so on. But nevertheless, I'm going to give a very short introduction. Before I do that, a bit of Zoom etiquette. So during the talk, please leave your microphones and video turned off, just for bandwidth reasons. If you have questions, make sure to use the chat, and we will address as many questions as possible. This meeting is recorded, so that was just the announcement that you heard there. And you're welcome to take screenshots and to share it on social media. Just make sure that you don't have anyone's face on the screenshot who has not agreed to be part of your tweet or screenshot. No? Okay. So welcome, Kate. She is head of history at the British School in Abu Dhabi. And she's originally, however, she's originally from the UK and taught in Wales for 6 years. She's an award-winning teaching and learning practitioner, speaker, consultant, blogger. She's a very active writer and also author of multiple books. How many books? 3?
3, few more on the way. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's it. You can follow her on Twitter, on Instagram. But today she's going to talk about how she implements and uses retrieval practice in her classroom. She has years of experience doing this, and I'm very much looking forward to her recommendations and her tips. Okay, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Carolina. Okay, brilliant. Everyone can see that? And go ahead with it. Yes, as already said, please do tweet, and you can tweet me, take screenshots, whatever, and use the hashtag, and I will get back to you afterwards. I'm looking forward to that. So to start off with, I think this is a great starting point. You may have seen me share this before. It's my teaching and learning jigsaw puzzle. So even though I'm a very passionate advocate for retrieval practice, I am well aware that retrieval practice is only one piece of a very complex puzzle when it comes to teaching and learning. And that's why I made it a jigsaw as well, to show how all of these factors are connected. And retrieval practice ultimately will be more effective when we combine it with a knowledge-rich curriculum, when we give effective feedback, when it is spaced over time. So yes, retrieval practice is incredibly important and effective, but it's just one piece of the teaching and learning puzzle. So what is retrieval practice? I'm sure lots of you are already familiar with this. This is probably my favourite definition from Pooja K. Agarwal, the creator of retrievalpractice.org, where she explains it's about getting information out. So I think for teaching for a long time, we were always focusing on getting that information into students' minds. But this is a strategy to get that information out. And it's a learning strategy, not an assessment strategy. So if you have engaged with academic research, you may have seen retrieval practice referred to as the testing effect, but we don't really call it that. We don't use that terminology with students. And I think that's probably because of the connotations of testing and that word, and it being high stakes, whereas retrieval is low stakes, so low stress, low pressure. And we say retrieval practice because we need to keep doing this on a regular basis. So just to elaborate on Pooja's definition, I love this model, the learning process. And it's always funny when I share this, or I share Ebbinghaus, The Forgetting Curve, and that's from 1885. And I always think this is research from years ago. It's not 2020 cutting edge. But I think that's important because there was a long period of time where there was a gap between academic research and the classroom. And the Bjorks, Dylan Willem has described Robert Bjork as the world leading expert on memory. I dedicated my last book to the Bjorks because they've helped me and I've learned so much. And when I spoke to Elizabeth Bjork about retrieval practice and asked her what do teachers really need to know, she said how frustrated she was, how they've done decades and decades of research, but it's still not got to teachers yet. And that's who really need to know, are the teachers and the students. So back to the learning process model. The first stage, obviously the attention and encoding stages. That's what I said we tended to focus on a lot, getting the information into students' minds. And if you're familiar with Rosenshine or Graham Nuttall, The Hidden Lives of Learners, they write about exposing students to material in different ways, at least 3 times, although we know some students will need repeated exposure, especially if they do have learning difficulties as well. But we do that all the time. We provide an explanation, we have consolidation tasks, we have question and answering. All of these things are part of the encoding process. And again, you might be familiar with short-term memory, which became known as working memory, and that's very limited. It limited in terms of how much information you can hold in capacity and duration. So a good example I always give is when you've walked into a room to get something and then you thought, what was it I came in here for? I forgot. And then this all links back to my teaching and learning puzzle, that links to cognitive load, all these things for us to be aware of. And what we want is for information to get past that, because we want information to get to the long-term memory. But we can't see inside students' minds. So how do we know if it's got there? And even if information has reached the long-term memory, a really good friend of mine said to me in a quiz, when a question came up, and it was a history question, which is my specialism, and I said I couldn't remember it, but I do know this. I said, I know it. It's in my long-term memory. I just can't recall it. And they were like, well, that's no good, is it? What good is it having information in your memory if you can't access it in a quiz when you need it? And we're not preparing students for quizzes, but that point does apply. We want students to have information in their long-term memory, but we want them to be able to get it out. But before we even get to the retrieval stage, we need to be mindful of storage. And this comes back to the Bjorks, who I'll probably keep referencing quite a lot. And with their theory of disuse, they write about retrieval and storage strength. So a student might have information in their long-term memory, but perhaps they can't complete a retrieval task or answer a question. Doesn't mean that it's not there. The issue could potentially be the storage or retrieval strength. So the storage strength refers to how secure, how embedded that information is. So if you can recall something, but it's a little bit patchy and there's not much detail, then we've got the low storage strength. And the retrieval storage refers to, Bjork says, how retrievable information is. Sometimes we can recall information really quickly and confidently and easily. Other times it takes us a while, doesn't it? Where it's that phrase, it's on the tip of my tongue. And you've probably been in a situation where you think, oh, I know this, and it eventually comes to you. It just took a while. So that's about the storage of retrieval strength. And then, yes, finally, the retrieval section. And I think what we've got to be careful of is, because obviously there's a lot of interest in retrieval practice, is just making sure that we don't skip the attention and encoding stages and just try and go straight to retrieval. We've got to actually make sure the information has really securely transferred to long-term memory. And Robert Bjork says this about retrieval practice. He says, using your memory shapes your memory. So what he means is every time you recall information from your long-term memory, it changes that piece of information in your memory so that it should be more retrievable, more easily and quicker and more secure when you retrieve it in the future. Hence why we have retrieval practice. So there it is, just in case anyone needed a reminder. I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with it, but I hope that's helpful. So a great research paper with the 10 benefits of retrieval practice. Now, lots of teachers say, I don't really have time to read these research papers. Sometimes they are filled with difficult language to understand, not always. But that's the beauty of what we've got now with the learning scientists, with Pooja Agarwal, and what I've tried to achieve with my book. I've tried to get the 10 benefits of the testing effect, which is a several-page document, and I've condensed what I think are the main benefits onto this slide for you. So the first one, which I think is the most important benefit, it's a really powerful learning strategy. And we all need to know, teachers, students and parents, why it works so well and how we can really harness the benefits of retrieval practice. But for me, there's 2 reasons why it's so powerful. And this is what I say with pretty much everything we're teaching and learning: evidence and experience. So the research is overwhelming. There's so much research about retrieval practice. When people ask me where should I start, I usually say Dunlosky's Strengthening the Student Toolkit. It's a great research summary, it's brilliant, and it ranks strategies, and retrieval practice is up there. But there's lots and lots of research studies, and there'll no doubt be more in the future. But that's evidence. What about a classroom context? And the reason I'm so passionate about retrieval practice is probably more so because of my experiences in the classroom, because I've seen my students make progress, because it's boosted their confidence, my confidence. So we want to be evidence-informed teachers, and we want to combine that with our own classroom experiences. And when they align together, like retrieval practice, the evidence says it works and my experience is very positive, then that's absolutely brilliant, isn't it? The next point, for me, this is one of the major benefits. I always talk about this with students. It's there in black and white, what students can recall, what they can't. And remember, it might be that not that they haven't learned, like that they haven't got it in their long-term memory. It could be their retrieval storage or strength is low, but it's there. It shows you where the gaps are. So then you can use retrieval practice to close those gaps. For me, that's incredibly powerful. As a teacher, it can guide my immediate planning. For parents, if they want to know, how can they help their students? But ultimately, students need to know where their gaps are so that they can close it. And rereading and highlighting do not identify gaps in knowledge. Pooja Agarwal has written a really good piece about transfer on her website. I'll tweet it out from retrievalpractice.org. Transfer has been described as the holy grail of learning, in the sense of it's the ability to transfer information into different contexts. And this just goes to show that retrieval practice isn't about recalling random, isolated, pub quiz trivia facts. It is to improve overall learning across all subjects. So again, incredibly important. Now, if we make retrieval practice a regular staple of our lessons, a regular classroom routine, students know that they will arrive and they will complete a quiz, then an indirect benefit could be that some students, and there has been some research into this, some students will prepare. They know they're going to be quizzed, so they can prepare for it. Or they see in their lessons that it works for them, so that they will then quiz themselves at home. So retrieval practice in lessons can have a really positive impact on independent learning outside of the classroom. And then finally, and again, there's been research on this, not a huge amount, but the research that was carried out in America found that students, and they were older students, who carried out regular retrieval practice, when it came to high stakes exams, actually felt decreased anxiety and more confident. And my experience as a teacher also echoes this. So the initial concerns about retrieval practice was, we're turning schools into exam factories, it's drill and kill. That's not the truth. That is not true at all. It actually can be a good thing in terms of well-being and boosting students' confidence. I mean, they can see right there, like I said, in black and white, they can see what they are able to recall and retrieve. They can see what they can't, and then they know how to identify and close that knowledge gap. So let's bust some myths. I've already sort of touched upon this. This is a really interesting one because there's an element of truth in this. We have always done quizzing in the classroom, but when I think just for myself personally, I just tended to ask about last lesson and then I would move on. And I remember the start of a lesson, the focus was the hook being engaging and exciting, but it wouldn't always be linked to learning or that effective. Whereas I'm still an advocate for that, having an engaging starter, but I want it to be effective. So therefore, I'll use retrieval practice now. So tasks can be engaging and effective instead of engaging and empty. And the other thing that I would do was I would teach content and content and content, and I wouldn't really truly revisit it until an end of unit assessment, a high stakes test. I wasn't doing lots of low stakes regular quizzing. And also, we didn't have the knowledge that we have now. I wish when I was training that I'd had access to the learning scientists and all these wonderful books. But the gap is closing between the academic research community and the teaching community. So whilst we've always had elements of retrieval practice, we've got to move away from this attitude, oh, it's nothing new, it's just come round again. Actually, there's a lot more information, a lot more research, a lot more for us to think about. Even if we've been doing it, let's do it even better than before. Now, this one I've heard, this myth, pre-COVID and now. I've used to hear this a lot. Oh, I haven't got time for retrieval practice. There's not enough time. And now with COVID, we haven't got time. Absolutely make time. I remember a colleague saying this to me, Kate, I just can't find time for retrieval practice. So I went to observe her lesson. There was an activity that involved about 10 minutes of cutting and gluing. And afterwards I said, right, we could easily adapt that task, save 10 minutes. We could have 10 minutes of that for quizzing. So again, if you haven't got the time, we need to find the time. Dunlosky said retrieval-based practice are the most effective strategies. Why would we not make time for them? So yes, it can be a struggle. I teach GCSE and A-level. There's a lot of content. I do understand. I've struggled myself with this, but I've made it work. I've found the time. Also this one, why do we need retrieval practice? We have Google. I do have to Google information, we all do, but isn't it better if we can just retrieve it without that? We don't want a generation to just become so reliant on Google. And this is quite a lazy myth, isn't it? It's quite insulting really as well, I think, to children to say that they don't need knowledge when they have Google. And Daisy Christodoulou has written a lot about this, about how actually to use Google effectively and really well, you do need knowledge and skills. So that is just absurd. This one as well, retrieval practice is really boring. It kills creativity in the classroom. I totally don't agree with this at all, but this could be true. And again, I say this from experience because I remember students talking to me in a previous school about a colleague saying, Miss, we do a test every lesson. It's really stressing us out. And I spoke to him, and a really well-intentioned teacher who was trying to introduce retrieval practice, but he called it a knowledge test, and he made it quite high stakes every lesson. So, and this was around the time when I was writing my first book, and I remember sharing with him some activities about how he could do retrieval practice that didn't just have to be a knowledge test every single lesson, how we could have lots of variety. And if you read my books, any of them, you'll know that there's loads of different ideas. Or if you're on Twitter, teachers are always sharing. But even the language we use, if students walk in and I say, sit down, we've got a test. Or come on in, everyone, get your laptops out, we're going to do a Kahoot quiz. It just makes a lot of difference. So lots of variety with retrieval practice. Again, it can be enjoyable, engaging, and effective. And then this myth as well, this is something that I was probably very guilty of, was just using retrieval practice at the start of a lesson. Now, I haven't encountered any research that says retrieval practice is more effective at a specific point in a lesson. Now, I say I haven't encountered any research. There might have been something published last week that I missed. I don't know. But basically, retrieval practice is effective and we could use it at any point. The start of a lesson is a great time to use retrieval practice. That is how I start the majority of my lessons, with a retrieval task. And Rosenshine says about 8 minutes of regular review, but we don't have to just limit it to that. if it's one of the most effective strategies, why would it only just take up 10 minutes of our time? I watched a colleague in my history department, she's a superb teacher, and in the middle of a lesson, she did a retrieval practice activity, which was a transition activity between topics, and it worked really well. And it can be used at the end of a lesson, as long as we're not asking about information from that lesson, because then that is fine, but that's more consolidation rather than retrieval, because we haven't had any time to pass to allow forgetting. And also, what's to say we can't have a whole lesson dedicated to retrieval practice? I do. We've looked at our curriculum, we've factored this in. When you think about exam classes, what I would always do, our department would teach all the content, teach it, and then at the end we'd have, right, we finished, we've got 2 months to revise or a month to revise. Well, actually, why don't you introduce spaced retrieval practice from September and have less time in May? Instead of having that month to revise, you've got perhaps 2 weeks. But actually, you've been spacing it out rather than cramming retrieval practice at the end. And I also have homework tasks linked to retrieval practice. One of them being, it's not a retrieval practice activity, but what I will ask students to do, it could be create 5 flashcards with a question and an answer based on the content this week. And I might say, use your textbook and use your notes to help you, but I'm promoting retrieval practice at a later date because they've got the flashcards that they can use and refer to. Right then, so where can we go wrong with retrieval practice? I was asked this in a CPD session that I did for a school, and it really got me thinking and reflecting. And I ended up writing a whole chapter in my new book about it. And a lot of these are based on my mistakes and from conversations with other teachers as well. So we could be really well-intentioned. And Professor Rob Coe posted a blog over a year ago that also raised some concerns about where we can go wrong with retrieval practice as well. So these are just what I consider some of probably the most common mistakes. This one is when teachers, students and parents don't really fully understand the importance, the value, the effectiveness. When a school says, right, we're introducing retrieval practice, that's our focus this term. I want to come in and I want to see quizzes, but then they haven't explained some of the research behind it, why it's so effective, why they should be doing it. And then it does seem like another buzzword. It seems like flavour of the month, that'd be something new, and then we could tick that retrieval practice box. Whereas actually, it really needs to be ongoing. And lots of the schools that I've been very fortunate to work with, when I do a CPD session, I say, I might be a one-off. I might not ever do a CPD session with you again, but this retrieval practice conversation has to carry on. And I always follow up my discussions with schools just to try and emphasize that it isn't a box that we have to tick. It's an essential teaching and learning strategy. Also, this is something that I was very guilty of. If you've read my pink retrieval practice book, there's lots and lots of tasks in there. And I thought very carefully about the task design, and that is incredibly important. But then I've reached a point where I've got so many retrieval tasks that I'm going to stop trying to thinking of more. I mean, I did think of a new one recently that I'll share with you, but that was because I had a purpose that it needed to serve. But basically I thought, right, I've got these tasks, I've got these templates, I'm going to repeat and rotate them. Now I'm going to focus on question design. And as part of my research for my book, I went on online quizzes and I looked at other questions that teachers were asking. And especially multiple choice questions, I saw some really badly designed questions, which I've probably been guilty of myself. Well, I have. And I say badly designed because I would look at a quiz where I had no knowledge of a topic in a different subject, but I was able to answer them because of the question design, because the question was easy, or because the options were comedy or ridiculous or power of elimination. So now my priority with my department, right, we've got these templates, we've got the tasks, let's look at these questions. How effective are they? How challenging are they? How can we improve them? So we've got to get that balance between question and task design. This is also attributed to the Bjorks, who coined the term desirable difficulties. So The challenge shouldn't be too easy, shouldn't be too difficult. Just like Goldilocks said, it should be just right. It should be desirable. Again, that's not easy to achieve. These things take time, they require careful thought and consideration, but I will share with you today a resource that provides desirable difficulties and challenge and support for everyone in the class without doing crazy, wacky, 4 differentiated worksheets. Again, I'm very guilty of this. Not enough time for feedback and reflection. I would just stick the answers on the board, or I would say, check your scores, let's move on. Because retrieval practice can hijack your lesson. So I was very mindful of that. So I'd say, right, okay, we've got so much to get through. I'll just sort of skip the feedback. But I was really missing a trick by doing that. Because if you do an online quiz and students have got 12 out of 15 correct, they need to know which answers were incorrect. That number doesn't mean anything really. They need to know which 3 they didn't get right because there's gaps in their knowledge, and they need to know so that they can close those gaps. If we don't provide time for feedback and reflection, then we really won't reap the benefits of identifying the gaps in knowledge. And again, this is very common. I've created a resource recently because lots of teachers were saying, how do we just get away from factual recall? And as a history teacher, I think I was doing this a lot, but we can use retrieval practice to support vocabulary instruction and understanding and retrieval for higher order thinking. So hopefully what I share with you today will be useful. Question I get asked, should I use multiple choice or should I use free recall? And free recall is where there's no support, like a brain dump. For example, write down everything you can remember about this topic. That's free recall. Well, there's pros and cons to both of them. Multiple choice questions, as I've said, we've got to design them really carefully. Otherwise, it's too easy, recognition, elimination, or simple guesswork. Multiple choice questions are great for providing opportunities for retrieval success and boosting confidence, and they're great for younger students. Megan Sumamaki, one of the learning scientists, wrote about this, about retrieval success versus retrieval challenge, which I really like, about getting that balance, providing opportunities for success, but also really challenge students. If we design diagnostic hinge questions, they could be great for addressing misconceptions. And I've been creating a lot of Google Forms lately, multiple choice, all just multiple choice. And I've been spending a lot of time on question design. But in terms of marking, there's no time at all for me to mark them because Google Forms will mark them themselves. So the time I'm investing in the question design, I'm saving time in terms of the feedback and also with my workload. Now, free recall is much more harder for the student. They have to think more, there's more effort, there's no options that they can select, but therefore it will be more effective. This can be a low effort, high impact strategy. So not much planning involved for the teacher, low effort for the teacher, but high impact on learning. Throughout the early years of my career, I had it the other way around. I was putting all this effort into these tasks and they were elaborate and they involved cutting, laminating, gluing, you name it, but they were probably low impact in terms of how effective they were with learning. So really flipped that on its head. Younger students with free recall will need support because their answers can be vague, not relevant, or just the general quality of their answers might not be great. And I'm going to give you an example of that now. So I used to, for years, I would put this on the screen, ask year 8, what can you recall about Henry VIII? Write it down. And year after year, I'd be really disappointed with their responses. First of all, some students would literally describe him and write about how fat and overweight he was. That's obviously not retrieval, that is a description. And that was disappointing. Other students would just recall basic facts. He had 6 wives, he chopped their heads off. And I would be disappointed because I taught about the break with Rome and the dissolution of the monasteries. Why weren't they writing about that? But actually, I never asked them to. My instructions weren't specific. I just said, write what you can remember about Henry VIII. So my instructions in a way were quite vague. But I teach the Tudors at A level. And I could just put this portrait up and say, right, you've got 5-10 minutes, write down everything you can remember. And they will write sophisticated answers about what we've been doing in the lessons. They wouldn't put he was overweight. So that's a classic example of a retrieval activity with the different ages. So with that year 8 class, I remember it was coming up, I thought, I'm not doing this portrait again. I'm going to change it. I want better responses. And that's how I came up with the picture prompt idea. The icons are from nounproject.com. Explain how each icon links to Henry VIII and the break with Rome. And they were able to write about his divorce, about his desire for a male heir, argument with the Pope, the Church of England. Their answers were much better. Now, these are only cues and prompts. There's a picture of a Pope, but they have to know the context. They have to be able to recall it from their long-term memory. And I was really, really impressed with their answers. And this is a really simple thing to do. And I've used this for lots of different topics. But instead of images, although the images do work well, you could also use vocabulary. And this is the task that I mentioned previously that provides support and challenge for all. So the same thing, write and answer what you remember about Henry VIII, aim to include these key terms. Now with the bronze, I always include words that I know every student in the class can use. Write about Henry VIII and I put king, and they all know he had a divorce. Now I'm not trying to dumb anything down, I'm literally trying to give everybody in the class that retrieval, success and a boost of confidence. And then as you can see here, the words obviously get harder, and we've got, this is great for literacy as well, with tier 3 subject specific vocabulary. Even if you didn't want to do this as a retrieval task, as a consolidation task, and you're trying to encourage students to use more key terms, this works well. So previously, we might have done something like said, you've got the bronze worksheet, you've got the silver, you've got the gold. And that really was, it was a really bad way, wasn't it? That, you know, and we were all well-intentioned. We thought that was the right way, but actually sometimes the students with the bronze worksheet, they know what dissolution is, but they never had that opportunity. They were limited to those words. So everybody here has the opportunity to be challenged, and that's just one resource there, not lots and lots of differentiation. It's about, again, desirable difficulties. I love using that activity. I've used it this week. I copied it onto a Google Doc with year 7, and they were writing about why William won the Battle of Hastings. And again, I really do feel that it helps improve the quality of their answers. Now, this is an activity, it's not in my new book, it's one, I wish I'd come up with it before my book was published, but teachers kept saying, how do we go beyond just the factual recall? So this is the pyramid, but I'm going to actually create another version, like a ladder, where we have factual recall here, but we scaffold it and we build it up to higher order thinking. And as you can see, you could actually easily change this. You could just have one factual recall and have one for each point, but you can see the questions get a lot more complex. So we've got closed and open questions. So, you know, the name of the twins, the city it was set. These are, you know, very short factual recall answers. And then quite complex. How does Blood Brothers illustrate the issue of social class? You know, students have got to have an understanding of social class and themes, and it is a lot more challenging. So this I shared on Twitter, and lots of teachers, by the way, I created this. I'm just obsessed with Blood Brothers. I did create a history version, but I always try and create Blood Brothers examples because it's my favorite. But this is Matthew Lynch, English teacher. He's made loads of these, and I just knew when I created it, that's why I did the Blood Brothers example, that it would have so much potential in the subject of English. But I've seen it in primary school, I've seen a geography version of it. Tom Needham on Twitter wrote a case study in my book about scaffolding questions, about not just starting off with the higher order, but building up to it and building their confidence with it. So you may even just have this over a series of lessons where you say, right, today, this lesson, we're just going to answer these bottom questions, and then we're going to have some feedback and reflection time. And then next lesson, right, let's answer these questions, feedback and reflection time. And then this will require more detail, more elaboration, right? So you go into just answer this now, and then we'll discuss it, we'll explore it. And you've been building up to that point. So yes, factual recall, there's a place for it, but we shouldn't just restrict retrieval to that. And another way we should, Tom Sherrington calls it vary the retrieval diet. And I always say that we shouldn't just use multiple choice or free recall. We should use them both. Doesn't matter, all age groups, use them both. We should use a range of activities, but also we shouldn't just rely on written retrieval practice. And I say this because I teach in an international school. There are students where English is a additional language. And I was doing all these retrieval tasks, and I was worried about some of the boys and thinking, oh, I don't know if they're actually grasping this, they're struggling with retrieval. Then when I used the retrieval practice placemat, these two boys I'd had the concerns with, they were retrieving information really quickly and confidently, and I was just so blown away and impressed. And obviously the issue wasn't their recall. The issue was their writing, that they were more confident verbally, but English as a second language, they weren't as confident, they weren't able to articulate and communicate it through their writing. So this has been difficult with online learning. I've tried to encourage it in breakout rooms, and now my school are back in the classroom. I'm really trying to have lots more verbal retrieval practice, and there's lots of ways we can do that, but we just, again, mix up that retrieval practice diet. Now, I know things are very different in the UK. I think you're still online learning for a little bit. I created this. It's a little bit like the teaching and learning jigsaw, that it shows retrieval practice is a really important part of teaching in a pandemic, whether that's in the classroom, whether it's online learning. But like the jigsaw puzzle, it's only one piece. And I've shown here, if we take any of these away, there will be a negative impact on learning. Now, actually, even if we have all of these, I've put reduced disruption, because we can't deny that there's been a disruption. There's been a pandemic. This talk of a catch-up, we don't have a time machine. We have to have some sort of acceptance of what has happened, but also, okay, how can we try and find those gaps in the knowledge and close them? And if there has been issues with attendance, perhaps due to COVID or due to bereavement, then retrieval practice, when done in an enjoyable and engaging and low stakes way, will identify the gaps in knowledge so that then we can close them. If there's been a lack of instruction and feedback, there'll be a lack of clarity. A lack of support and well-being, we know students will have increased anxiety. We can link that back to retrieval practice. Regular retrieval might boost their confidence in terms of their learning. If they don't invest effort and motivation, and this isn't just during a pandemic, this is always, then the students will underperform. But retrieval practice is quite blunt. It will tell them where the gaps are. When students highlight, I give them this analogy about the actor. An actor will highlight their lines. It doesn't mean they've learnt their lines. They've still got to go and learn them. And the only way they'll know if they have learnt their lines is by removing the script and testing themselves. And retrieval practice will be honest with the students in a way that highlighting and rereading won't. Access to resources, that obviously is an issue in the UK. So perhaps when we get back to school, again, we can look for the gaps in the knowledge. There may be obviously a disadvantage gap, and we can aim to use retrieval practice to close it. A lack of communication, there can be confusion if students haven't been logging in or they've had internet issues, there's confusion, which again, perhaps we can address through retrieval practice. And I'm not saying retrieval practice is the answer to everything. I'm just saying that we need to still be using it, because if we don't, we'll then resort back to ineffective strategies. And why would we do that when we know how effective it is? So in terms of technology, whether that's in the classroom or remote, these are my 3 rules. Keep it low stakes. For me, I use Google Forms. I said I was making them for multiple choice questions, but generally with some of my year groups, I use them for assessments, and I keep them sort of formal, high stakes, and then low stakes, I use quizzes, Kahoot, Quizlet, Carousel Learn, those types of things. So is it a low stakes tool that are fun and enjoyable? Is it workload friendly for you, the teacher? Quizzes, you can teleport questions from lots of these online quizzes. You can go, you can look, you can take questions, you can edit it, it will mark it for you. If any of the online quizzing tools are causing you workload issues, simply don't use them, okay? Low effort for you, high impact for the students. And then for me, this is probably the most important one. Is it user-friendly? Is it easy to use for you as the teacher in terms of creating the quiz and setting it, and also for the students? Because they're very good, aren't they, students with technology? We want it to become automatic with them, that they know exactly what to do with a Kahoot or a Mentimeter, and it's automatic, so the working memory isn't thinking about how to navigate this quiz website, but instead they can focus on reading the questions and the retrieval aspect of it. So in terms of your using technology or sharing any quizzing tools, I think those are the 3 golden rules we should stick to. So recommended reading, I did have actually loads on here, but I thought, right, I'm going to stick to just some really just superb books. The Science of Learning, they wrote the foreword to Retrieval Practice 2, 77 studies every teacher should know. That book is superb. I cannot praise it enough. It takes research studies and it summarizes them into a 2-page infographic. It's incredible. It's great for a classroom teacher, head of department, head of year, senior leaders, parents, even students. If you go to innerdrive.co.uk, I will tweet this out, then they've got, all you have to do is sign up with an email, and they've got free posters and infographics, not just about retrieval practice, but all aspects of memory, revision, Cornell notes, sleep, all sorts of things. They are absolutely incredible. And then we've got Pooja Agarwal with Patrice Bain, who I've mentioned Pooja a lot, and Patrice Bain has written this book, which I felt needed to be written. This is for parents. I feel like teachers, we're really getting there, understanding retrieval practice. The students are on this journey with us. But in terms of the teacher triangle, the third piece of that teacher triangle, the third point, sorry, are the parents. So that's another book I'd recommend. Pedro de Bruquier, I love this book. He's a great character. It's more than retrieval. It's just a really interesting, enjoyable read. Psychology in the Classroom is memory, motivation, curiosity. I think actually they might have done some work, Jonathan with the Tile Network, but Jonathan based in Scotland, Jonathan Firth and Mark Smith are brilliant. And then finally, this links in with what I'm going to talk to you about, How Learning Happens, Carl Hendrik, Paul Kirschner, quite a recent book. It's been really successful. I really enjoy it. And so much so, I coined the term, the Kirschner effect. So please do tweet Paul Kirschner right now and tell him that I'm singing his praises. So the Kirschner effect is this. I think when you're evidence informed, you become a more efficient and effective teacher. And personally, I found teaching far more enjoyable. It's motivated me to keep learning, to keep reflecting, to keep trying to be a better teacher. But if any of you have followed me on Twitter, you might have seen me get into, I don't know, a little spat when people promote learning styles and neuromyths. And it's just because I feel so passionate about challenging outdated, ineffective practices and promoting evidence-informed practices. And basically, Paul Kirschner is an academic researcher, he's an author, he speaks on Research Ed, he's on Twitter, he's my inspiration, and that's what he does. He challenges myths and he shares evidence-informed practice. And I'm sure that a lot of you can relate to this, that you consider yourself to be an evidence-informed teacher and you feel a better teacher because of it, and you actually really enjoy being an evidence-informed teacher. And that is the Kirschner effect. Well, so I say. So thank you very much. We are going to have a question and answer session. They're my books. The Retrieval Practice 2 is completely different to the first Retrieval Practice. It's not a second version, completely different. This is more introduction, lots of tasks. This is the reflection, case studies, retrieval practice mistakes, teaching in a pandemic, and then a whole chapter dedicated to retrieval practice in different subjects and at primary level. And if you are on Twitter, please go to my pinned tweet. Tomorrow, I will be announcing 3 winners 3 people will win all 3 of my books. So I'm really looking forward to that. Anywhere in the world, I know we've got people watching from the Philippines and Pakistan and Wales and Scotland and England and Ireland. So anywhere in the world, I will get those 3 books to you. All you have to do is retweet, and then Tweet Draw will randomly select a winner. So Carolina, that's it. I think that's pretty good timing for the question and answer session.
Excellent timing. Thank you so much, Kate. I'm going to do this clapping, hearts clapping. Right, yeah, let's open the floor for some questions. I think there was one in the chat a while ago when you showed the pyramid activity. I think someone asked whether you have students self-select which question to answer, I think.
Yes, that's why I said about perhaps, because it depends how you want to use that. I've actually used that for an end of unit. Instead of doing an end of unit test, I did an end of unit overview, retreat with low stakes. So I actually did it all in a lesson. That was one lesson. And they had time to write detailed answers for the higher questions, and we had time for the feedback and reflection. If you want to just use it at the start of a lesson, then I would do the thing where I said just select one from one row. So there's lots of ways that you could just sort of mix that up. There is a template, I'll tweet that out. I've got that pyramid template that you can download for free as well.
I think there's a follow-up question right now here. Do you go through answers on the retrieval pyramids?
Yeah, I do. So that was something that I was really guilty of not doing, but I'd make sure I absolutely do. And there's what I will tend to do when we're going through the answers is students can get another pen, a different color pen, and then they can always add or make notes so that they've got in one color pen what they were able to retrieve, and then let's just say in a green, it could be any color pen, I'm not bothered, it's just the showing, oh, I missed this out, or I didn't include this, or I didn't get this correct. So that is a really important part of the pyramid, is actually discussing the answers, especially that top one, the higher order thinking. Was a factual recall, you could just put the answers on the board. If there were dates, I could just say, right, well, these are the answers, I don't have to spend much time on it. But the higher up we go, the more elaboration, the more feedback I think they deserve.
Mm-hmm. And there's another question in the chat here from Adam. From your recommended books, which would you recommend for primary teachers?
Oh, for primary, I'd probably say out of all of them, the one I would recommend for everyone, primary and secondary, is the 77 Studies, The Science of Learning. It's just brilliant, and I just love the Inner Drive website as well. So good.
There's one question here, maybe it needs a bit more clarification. It just asks, how do you assess the tasks?
How do I assess how effective they are?
Maybe we need some clarification for this one.
Well, it's so basically that's really hard to say. How does the task work? But remember when I said their answers were good, like compare the Henry VIII ones, and I was very impressed with their answers with the picture prompts. For me, the fact that the quality of their written work had improved was the sort of validation assessment that task is effective. That's what I wanted. I wanted better developed answers, or I wanted answers that had subject-specific terminology in it. So then there it is right in front of me. So I think about my goal, what am I hoping to achieve with this retrieval task, and then measure it against that.
Another question here from Kate. When you refer to spaced practice, how much time should be left, or does it not matter?
Well, do you know what? You might be able to answer this better than me, because I spoke to Paul Kirschner. I get asked this all the time. There isn't an exact amount, is there? It's really difficult. It's not to say that the Inner Drive did suggest some timelines, but again, for me, I can't answer that because it depends on the concept, the complexity of it. That's what I haven't shared it today, sorry, in this presentation, but I came up with a retrieval practice challenge grid, which had questions from last lesson, last week, 2 weeks ago and further back. That helped me space out retrieval. So in a generalized way, that is a really good activity for spacing. And the research says, you know, ask the question just before students are about to forget it. But again, that's very difficult because students, whilst there are similarities in how they learn, we don't know when that moment is when they're going to forget it. So as long as we keep retrieval practice regular, then we will be spacing it out. But would you agree that you can't?
Yeah. So I think the important thing is to keep in mind the processes that are engaged, and what you want is basically what you basically just said is you want to retrieve that information just right before it's forgotten. So it's still there. You still can access it. And with that access to that information, it gets boosted. Okay, so that's what you want to achieve. And that's basically why you need the expertise of the teacher in the room, because they know the materials, they know their students. Okay, so basically just before it's forgotten. One way to think about it as well is when you teach something very like new that students have no prior knowledge of, then that knowledge will be more fragile. And so what you want to make sure is basically maybe have a revision session just shortly after you have introduced the concept for the first time, and then expand those those breaks over the course of time so that they get longer. So there's like this expanded learning schedule that has also been shown to be effective. But yeah, so that would be my answer to this. Yeah,
that's why you're a learning scientist. That was a great answer.
Let me see if there's some other question. I think there's one about marking. So you so hi Kate, you said you sometimes use homework as retrieval practice. Do you mark such homework?
Well, the homework I mentioned, the flashcards, students have got to have very clear guidance and modelling. Yes, I will check the flashcards because I made the mistake of saying, right, create 5 flashcards based on what we've been doing this week. And when I looked at their flashcards, they were either too easy, far too difficult, or they were asking questions. I was like, why are you asking that question? You don't really need to know that. That's a really random question. So they've got to be shown examples. There are some students, because a TA spoke to me about this, and it was a student that I teach with learning difficulties, where they just, question design is hard. So to ask students to create questions for flashcards, it is a big ask. If we're going to get them to do that, we've got to model it, show examples, and then we've got to check it. The alternative is that we can find ready-made flashcards and just say, use these, because then they just use them for retrieval, which is fine. I've made my own flashcards for my classes, massive workload issue. It took me hours and hours. Although having said that, I've used them every year since, so I felt like it paid off. In terms of marking, I use the Dylan Willems 4 quarters, which is 25% peer assessment, 25% self-assessment, 25% skim and scan, 25% detailed marking. I don't do the detailed marking for retrieval practice. The detailed marking will be an essay, an exam answer. Retrieval practice, I might skim the work, or it can be self-assessed. Dylan Willems said the best person to mark a test is the person who's just taken the test. We can do peer assessment, or if you're using technology, it will mark it for you. So really, retrieval practice shouldn't be taking up our time in terms of marking. Well, that's what I think.
There's another question here. You recommended having an informal school book club in your first retrieval book. Is there a blog or chapter from a book you would recommend starting with?
For a book club, yeah. So there's actually lots of schools on Twitter that have done this. I can tag them in so you can see. They sent me what they had a little booklet about with questions and prompts. Rose and Shine, Tom Sherrington's Principles and Actions. That is probably a great starting point because it's a small, thin book. It packs a lot. It's got lots of great stuff for you to talk about. That for me, if I was to launch a book club right now, it would be that. And then I'd also make sure as well, something obviously I'm really guilty of is only reading about cognitive psychology for a long time because I've been writing my books. So it's important whether you're going to have a cognitive psychology reading group. If it's a teaching and learning one, then I would say, right, let's have some leadership, let's have some literacy, and try and have a varied book club. A good thing as well would be to ask staff, what have you read that is useful? I remember in the last school I was at, they didn't have a CPD library. I kept hounding them to have a library because I'm in Abu Dhabi, it costs loads of money. They got a library and someone just typed in Amazon teaching books and just ordered a load of really outdated books. And I just was devastated really, because if that person had asked me or put out a Google form, then we could have said what books we've read that we liked or that we want to read. So instead, that school has a CPD library that just gathers dust. So a CPD library will only work if the staff are involved and obviously if they want to read and if they're supported as well. So it's not easy to launch a book club, but it's a great idea.
Do you think the pupils would benefit from science of learning course?
Yeah, 100%. The learning scientists, I know I keep referring to, but that's for students, parents and teachers. I always show their YouTube videos. I talk about it in class. I've done assemblies on it. It's not enough for us to just know it. Like Patrice Bain said with the parents, but with the students, otherwise they just won't use retrieval practice. We'll use it in lessons and then they'll go home and they'll cram the night before the exam and they'll reread. So they really do need to be educated about these strategies, definitely.
So here, most of the tasks discussed are about the same topic. Is there a place for mixed back retrieval, or is that less effective?
So interleaving, mixing topics up. Yeah, sorry, you could do that with the pyramid. You could do that with my retrieval grid. There's loads of examples online. On my teaching website, lovetoteach87.com, there's a blog about the retrieval grids where people have interleaved it as well. So where they've done last lesson and last week, and then they've gone last term, last year. So they've done it even further and they've tried to either space it out or they've either there is a difference between spacing and interleaving. I don't interleave in my subject because I teach history and we take a chronological approach, but maths, as an example, there's lots of research that says interleaving, where you mix up topics as you're teaching them, that it does work effectively. So I'm not sure if I answered that question.
Yeah, I think the only thing about interleaving is that when you interleave different topics, what's really important to pay attention to is that the different topics actually have some kind of relationship with each other, because that's when interleaving actually works the best, when it allows the student to see how, for example, different concepts are similar or different from each other. So just interleaving completely unrelated topics,
random, yeah,
it's not effective, really.
Yeah.
It's always to try to pitch topics against each other that have some kind of connection with each other.
Yeah, and that's why I write about this in my book. That's why in history it wouldn't really work. I teach Russia and the Tudors. It wouldn't work to do that, and we teach it, like I said, chronologically. We can have Russia and the Tudors taught. We do have two separate units taught, but I just mean in terms of sort of me as a teacher, lesson by lesson. Yeah, it really sort of does come down to the subject and like you said, about the connections.
Mm-hmm. Would you follow a routine like on Mondays we recap what we did last week, and then every fourth Monday you go over a month's worth of content?
I don't really have that, although I know actually quite a lot of schools that do. We have planned it into our schemes of work, but not on a sort of, we have a 2-week timetable. So I can't say that I would do much because I'm a history teacher, so I might not see a class, whatever. But or if you've got a class sort of every Friday, Patrice Bain said, why don't you dedicate that to a flashback Friday or throwback Thursday or whatever? So yes, that's not something that I do. but I know teachers that do that. But again, I can't really sort of say. Other teachers have said they do that and it works well.
Okay, a question here. In math, I find we just give students a math question to answer on a multiple choice quiz. Would you say this is still retrieval practice or just practicing a method?
No, definitely multiple choice is a form of retrieval. And follow Craig Barton, because you probably already do. He does a lot about diagnostic questions. It's been really interesting for me reading about that. He suggests that students should be able to answer it within 10 seconds, whereas in history, I always say a little bit longer because we have longer answers. But multiple choice questions work great in maths. It's that hinge question. It's, the idea of putting an incorrect answer in, and then discussing afterwards, how did they get that incorrect answer because of the process and the method. But again, it is a form of retrieval practice, a multiple choice question. How effective it is depends on question design and the distractors, the options. For me, that's where I was going wrong. We've got to have plausible distractors. Too many multiple choice quizzes will stick in a funny comedy option, an option that is so obviously wrong that we can just write it off, and then you're probably left with two, or just, it must be that one. So the key to effective retrieval with multiple choice is getting those distractors to be plausible.
Yeah, and competitive as well. So you want basically them really to have to recognize which ones, like all of them could be equally correct. They just have to really and apply their knowledge and retrieve information in order to answer the question. Yeah, but that's basically what the research shows. Yeah. All right, I think we could go on, but I'm just conscious about the time. We have a recording of this, and I'm going to stop the recording right now just to make sure that we have it. Oh wait, I'm going to